Hello, everyone. Welcome to Computers Collaborator, Machine Learning in the Creative Practice. I'm Marika Jorditzma, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel. Today, we are lucky to have with us a selection of panelists who are at the forefront of what I believe is an exciting new paradigm in music making, something that challenges our basic assumptions about the role that technology should play or could play in our creative process. Joining us today is going to be multimedia artist, creative technologist, and musicians Lucky Dragons. Conceptual, yes, I think that a round of applause. Conceptual avant-pop duo Yacht. And the Google Magenta team, who are currently developing and learning what it means to make machine learning tools to support the creative process. So we have just an hour today, and this is a big topic that I think most of you join me in being very excited and learning what this sort of new technology can offer us as music makers and creatives. So the way that we have organized it is each one of these groups is going to give a presentation. Then we're going to have members, representatives from each of the group join us for a panel discussion. Since we only have an hour, we're not going to have time for Q&A during this session, but afterwards, if you want to leave the theater directly and meet people from the groups out in the hallway, you can ask them questions directly. So I'm going to start by calling Lucky Dragons onto the stage.
Is that okay?
Yeah, this is good. Thank you.
Okay. So we can get up on the monitor? The first. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Luke.
And I'm Sarah Rara.
And we're just so incredibly excited and honored to be here with you guys.
Yeah, just to be a part of this because we're actively learning about this as we go. So we feel like, in a way, we are in that space of kind of productive, amateur, the person who's like loving and passionate about the thing they're just beginning to learn when it comes to machine learning.
And I think the thing to keep in mind is that it's not a hard step to get into something like working with, thinking about how you come up with intelligent machines or machines that know how to listen. It's actually something that we do already all the time. We use machines to expand what we're able to sense, how we're able to listen and see, and to look at processes and our own biases in new ways. So we can see something where we only have an instant to look at it, and then we can see it all unfolding in front of us. And I think this is something that we're really drawn to, is being able to take an action or a thought process and to see all the possibilities unfold in front of you. And to hold that space of possibilities in your mind as you're working.
So I think built into this is that that space of expectation and thinking about what a next move might be. Or also, for us, what is really crucial is thinking about the way that we listen and the way that our ears and our attention are trained to listen, and trying to discern how vision and sound might operate differently, and how sound might be a special case in terms of listening, and the complexity of all of the operations that we do as human beings, the way we separate a sound signal into the signal itself, the information it might carry about the space it's in, the language valences, all these aspects of listening that are really for us, they also emerge from earlier practices. We often turn back to this Gertrude Stein idea about repetition.
Yeah, so I think sort of the important corollary to keep in mind with all this is that to preserve what's human, or to investigate more thoroughly what is human about music and art, or any kind of interaction, because we are really compressing what we know about it and how we behave towards each other and how we are alive. And so this Gertrude Stein lecture from 1935, Portraits and Repetition, she talks about how to basically compress a life and how to describe it. And she said in order to do that, you can't use repetition. So to be alive means to not repeat yourself. It means that you're constantly insisting or emphasizing. And this is something I think about expression, is that it has vitality. It is constantly reasserting itself and insisting on itself rather than repeating. So to describe something, to take it outside of its life, is to have repetition.
And repetition is something I find that human beings are really bad at. When we repeat an action or repeat a gesture, it's always with a kind of difference, that over time something builds and it's not true repetition. There's always this transformation of emphasis that Stein talks about. And her definition of genius is to be able to listen while speaking. So that's something we've also been thinking about in terms of machine learning. How does one, as a human being, respond while listening or perform while listening? And that's something I think that musicians are trained to do, trained to perform while also listening.
I'd say not just musicians, but anybody who's alive.
Yeah, any human being. Yeah, any conscious being.
It's a condition of being
Yeah.
alive, and you can tell somebody's alive if you see them listening and speaking at the same time.
Yeah.
And if we can capture that quality of being alive in the systems we design, in the algorithms we use, then we're preserving, I think, what's most vital about music. But I think another key thing to keep in mind is, and this is already being built into the tools we use, is the role that attention plays in all this. And this is something about how our minds have trouble with repetition, is that we're constantly going back into our memory, anticipating things. So this backward-forward kind of attention is something that is really crucial towards developing an understanding.
So we made a series of recordings that are based on experiments by Diana Deutsch, who's a researcher at UC San Diego, and she researches auditory illusions. So she researches those spaces in sound where there's a kind of cognitive slippage. And the interesting thing is, for optical illusions, they're just infinite number of optical illusions, but for auditory illusions, there's only about 40 to 50 known auditory illusions, and most were discovered by Deutsch in the past 20 years. So they're kind of new discoveries, and it's also, I point this out just to say that maybe sound is a special case. Sound is different than image cognitively. But in this experiment, a subject listens to a syllable spoken by a human voice, repeated at very fast intervals,
Alternating
and
channels.
alternating between left and right. And though the signal stays the same, the subject will start to generate other syllables, and then phrases, and then sentences. It's as if the mind cannot actually hold repetition. To process the sound signal, a human subject will insert difference and layers of interpretation in language. So we produced a series of recordings, and then we had different listeners listen to the recording and record the words that they generated as listeners, which are unique to the listener.
So we'll just listen to a little bit from the beginning, and you can sort of let your mind drift and hear repeating patterns. Sometimes some people hear it just as music, some people hear it as language. So I think this is, for us, it's an interesting case study of something that is produced by machine, but then we sort of complete it as listeners.
So hopefully you generated some language in listening to that. Sometimes when we perform that work live, sometimes people come up to me after the performance and say, like, how could you use such foul language like in this performance? There's children here. And actually it's all generated by the listener. So it's all, it's your own imagination.
But I think this sort of the wildness and that kind of slippage that happens on the side of the listener is something that we're really interested in, how this is being encoded into the tools that we're using. So we thought it might be worthwhile to look at some sort of historical ways of representing different forms of listening. So this is Pierre Schaeffer's treatise on musical objects. So Pierre Schaeffer is sort of known as like the, one of the first people to use sampling technology with cutting tape.
Tape music, early sound collage.
Musique concrète. So basically this is a very comprehensive idea of listening that sort of folds together these 4 different modes, and they're always kind of working in a cycle. And this is the idea that there's some...
There's different modes of listening, and he defined these as listening, comprehending, perceiving, hearing. And the idea is that these do not occur kind of sequentially or with much differentiation. They occur simultaneously with more weight towards, or more emphasis towards one kind of listening or the other. And I find that really holds up today, that listening often blends with hearing, that a kind of reduced listening to like the quality of the sound is happening simultaneously with a more linguistic parsing of the sound.
And I think also where it gets really relevant is this idea that some kinds of listening are learned. So you can learn how to interpret symbols and language from the field of sound, or you can sort of recognize someone's voice or particular structures to things you're hearing. But you can also kind of de-learn things, like go back to this attention to raw subjective perception. It's something where, for instance, if you live next to a freeway and over time you learn not to hear those sounds, this kind of like subtractive learning, I think is an interesting polarity. This is the sort of cycle that Pierre Schaeffer came up with. Thought it was interesting to sort of use it as a metric to be like, well, which of these forms are we using and how do they work together?
And how might we teach a machine to do these subtly different operations simultaneously?
I think another beautiful way of describing similar thing is Pauline Oliveras' idea of deep listening, that you have this sort of global and specific listening that have to be always happening simultaneously and kind of in concert with each other.
And they happen simultaneously, but you kind of cruise through this terrain of sound by shifting your attention. And in many ways, that practice is something that's learned. It's not necessarily an automatic. This is Marianne Amaché's model for listening, where instead of composing music, composing sound, she thought of her work as composing listeners.
And sometimes this is very literal. She would work, at very high volume to produce these kind of tone patterns, and then this sort of physical response that she noticed, autoacoustic physical response in your ear, to have this resonant frequencies that were produced literally inside your ear.
Inside your ear, so nothing to do with any acoustic external
or
signal.
Or cognitive. It's just something that you have the event, you have the cochlear response, and then you have a neurological response, and they're all kind of collaborating together to make this perception and understanding of
And I think
sound.
of her relationship to the ear almost like our relationship to the computer as collaborator. In her experiment, she's almost building in a kind of externalizing way of thinking about the way she perceives sound. So there's almost an alien quality to the sounds that she's studying, even though they're perceived all within one's own ear.
Yeah, and it's important to note that her music doesn't really exist on recordings. There's a few recordings of it, but in general, it was music designed to be experienced live and in a certain space. So she would do sound that was meant to be heard through walls or in, at a distance or over durations of time. So this kind of grounding of the listening experience in a physical location, having a body, having your own experience, I think is something worth taking away from this. Yeah. So finally, we're just going to look at this piece that we did, performance, for a choir that was walking along Hansen Dam in the North San Fernando Valley, which is a 2-mile-long path. And the idea was to have the choir spread out so far so that the audience and the singers were mixed together. And
And part of this approach is we really come from a kind of performance tradition that uses scores, that uses text instructions. But when we think of a score, that is a way of compressing information. It's a form of compression that then is decoded and kind of unfurls into this more complex entity. So in our minds, it is very connected to digital processes, even though this is hearkening back to this kind of older kind of algorithmic model of these text scores that generate our works.
But also, to really push home this idea that for anything that we would call machine learning or machine intelligence, there is a human component to it that is doing, deciding what to include in the training, evaluating. Like, there's a lot of
and then built into that, of course, our own biases and our own way of kind of compressing.
Or it's a reflexive process of Yeah, I think you see your bias made manifest when you work with these models, and so we wanted to share an example of something that was very analog, like as analog as you could get. It's the performance. So what you'll see a little bit is that each singer has their own unique part of the text, and it's been fragmented across all the people walking along. And for each of the singers, they have different modes they can go into. They can teach their song to somebody else, which is this kind of transitive thing that happens that goes from call and response to kind of
moving towards unison. So from call and response
like around
to unison. And in this process, they almost kind of interpolate between their two individual songs.
Yeah. So we're interested in how somebody owns their own style, their taste, their way of performing, their sense of being in the body that is almost meditative, and then figures out how to share it with somebody else. That is something that I think we're thinking a lot about how to do with computers. It's like, how, yeah, okay.
This is the spreading ground and is performed at Hansen Dam in Pacoima.
Yeah, I have to say I'm really excited to go first because then we set it up for other people to talk more about.
Please discuss this more. Thank you.
But hopefully you can also see sort of the pleasure of singing and the pleasure of singing together. I hope you can get that too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
What was that?
Thank you. Okay, so next up we're going to have Yacht join us for their presentation.
Okay, so we're Yacht. We're a trio, a slapstick, etc. For anyone who isn't familiar with our work, Yacht was founded in 2002 by this one. It was named after the sign that he saw in Portland, Oregon that said Young Americans Challenging High Technology. We don't know what this business did or if it was a business. It was kind of pre-internet, so we're not exactly sure. We can never really track it down.
It seemed like a good idea.
We've kept the acronym through a lot of different incarnations, and despite its affiliation with luxury capitalism, because we like what it articulates, which is that this idea that we should remain in constant dialogue with technology. Not in the sense that we're Luddites, obviously, I mean, we're here, but in the sense that we never want to be passive about the tools that we're using, and we want to stay kind of consistently mindful of our relationship with them and the push and pull between using tools and letting our tools explicitly shape the output of our work. We want to preface this also by saying that we're not coders, and our relationship to technology in the context of art making has always kind of been from the outside looking in. We believe in tools and in access to tools and in using tools in sideways ways beyond their intended parameters to see what interesting things shake out in the process. And admittedly, this was a lot easier to do before the larger consolidation of technological power made it harder to look under the hood without advanced technical knowledge. But we soldier on regardless, with our main prime directive being that we want to do as much as possible with as little as possible, which is something that we picked up from reading a lot of Buckminster Fuller and drawing the analogies between that writing and our own upbringing in sort of decentralized punk communities in the Pacific Northwest. We thought that before we started talking about our machine learning experiments, to just give you a few projects that will give you a sense of who we are and what our values are. So we once released an album cover exclusively via fax by building a web application that identified people's nearby fax machines, like at FedEx and Office Depot, and sent it directly to them. We liked the idea of transmitting an image through sound, because that is what music is or should be in our minds. And also this notion of activating a dormant technology, this kind of latent space of these fax machines that were just waiting to be used. Both as a way of showing what's available and of illustrating what's wasted when we move too quickly onwards to the next thing. This should probably tell you that we're interested generally in fucking with distribution mechanisms. We once released an EP as a 2-disc set, one including the EP, and one a clear, unplayable disc encoded with all of our music. But we had the CD manufacturing plant stop manufacturing before the reflective foil was applied, which is what makes it playable. On the same tip of exploiting inherent vulnerabilities and opportunities within existing ecosystems, we just recently did this incredibly small project, but released a song called Abolish ICE. That's just me saying abolish ICE over and over again for a full minute, which is like the legal minimum a song can be in order to qualify as a song through digital distribution platforms and on Spotify. So this is kind of like a virtual picket, and something that anybody can add to a playlist as a kind of subversive act. We just wrapped a 4-year project, which some people in this room were involved with actually, to reactivate a dormant piece of public art in downtown LA called the Triforium, which is a 6-story, 60-ton concrete structure that was originally designed to synchronize light and sound into a new art form called polyphonoptics. And we worked with this really amazing interdisciplinary team of coders and artists and musicians to bring back the lights, which had been offline for decades, and to rescue the original program software from 8-bit paper tape and make it responsive again to live musical input. And we share this because, again, it's an example of what can happen when old and new technologies cohabit, and what happens when you really think about how to make use of things, again, as much as possible with as little as possible. So we became interested in machine learning and creativity a few years ago, for all the same reasons that all of us probably have. We've kind of fucked around with every publicly available tool, but we thought we'd share with you the specifics of a method that has worked for us in terms of making a successful output, and our metric of success being a yacht song. We're not like trying to make middle machine music here. We want to make pop music. We want to make music that we can stand by and put our name on. And if we're going to use a totally new process, it has to produce results that both sound like us, and feel like a step forward, or at least like an interesting step sideways. So,
we used Magenta's music VAE model, which allowed us to use latent space interpolation to create pathway between different melodies from our back catalog. So this is what this is what it used to look like.
Maybe it looks different now. We'll hear in a minute. Yeah, okay.
We'll hear more about that. So in order to work this way, we first had to annotate our entire back catalog of music into MIDI. So we took we separated like bass, guitar,
vocal melodies,
keyboard melodies, drum patterns. Yep, exactly. And so then we took pairings of those melodies, fed it into the music VAE model at different temperatures, and sometimes like a bunch of times, just in order to create a big collection of 16-bar patterns that we could go through and compose a song with.
So to demonstrate, let's start with just a melody. Yeah, so this is a single vocal melody.
So this was one of several generated sequences from an interpolation between two old songs, Hologram and I Wanna Fuck You Till I'm Dead. Fed through.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you want to step back and talk about?
Yeah, well, I mean, generally
Why?
speaking, I think like a lot of artists, we like to set like really hard and fast rules when we're working with any kind of material, and this material seems explicitly like good for that. We've always really worked best with self-imposed or external, i.e., monetary constraints. So we made up a set of rules that we think works and allowed us to refine this kind of output into a way that felt personable to us.
Yeah. So, for example, some things we can't do, we couldn't add any notes, we couldn't add any harmonies, we can't like jam or improvise or interpret, anything. Essentially, we can't be creative. Yeah, so there's no additive alteration, only subtractive or transpositional.
Yeah, but we can assign any melody to any instrument. Like that melody we just played, I said was a vocal melody. So we just arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but in our hearts decided that would be that. But yeah, so we can do that. So it could be a keyboard line or a bass line or a vocal line. We can transpose anything that comes out to the song that we're working on, to the key of that song. And we can structure it. We can cut it up. We can basically do collage with all of the output to form something into a song size piece, I guess.
So within that set of rules, we could basically give everyone in this room the same output or the same set of output, and we would all make completely different songs, which is kind of the point of all of this.
Yeah.
So now we're going to play you what we did with that generated melody. We decided that it would be a vocal line.
And it sounds like this.
I want your phone to my brain. I want you to call my name. I want you to do it too. Oh, won't you come, won't you come, won't you work on my head? Be my number 9 to be alive, to be with you like a weed. I can feel it in my head like a dog in bed. And
So one of the most interesting and challenging parts of working with this kind of material is actually performing it physically, because the melodies that it generates have a pretty minimal relationship to the body, or at least to like the competencies of our historically pretty punk rock operation. Like, I'm not a good singer, I'm not a virtuosic singer. And one of my fears going into this was like I wouldn't be able to sing these melodies because they're so like incredibly precise, there's no room for variation. And even the things that sound simple are like really outside of our own really embodied patterns of play. You want to talk about drumming?
Yeah, just like some of the drum patterns. So we did this with, not only just melodies, but with drum patterns. And then sometimes we transpose the drum patterns into chord patterns, since this model didn't do chords at the time that we started working with it. But yeah, playing drum parts that like on paper look simple and even sound like a little goofy or stupid ended up being incredibly hard to play. Like a fill that was maybe 2 bars took me 30 minutes to learn just because it wasn't in the palette of drumming that I'm used to playing.
Yeah, it like makes you realize like how much of your performance comes from like previous habit and things like crutches that you have internally, or just leaps that you tend to make based on your own musical upbringing culturally. It's like allows you to sort of see yourself a little more clearly. And there were many instances in working with this material that the melodies actually sort of taught us to play better,
Yeah.
or like
Or
allowed us like to
differently.
imagine different ways of playing.
Yeah. Let's talk about lyrics now.
Yeah, so the lyrics to the song that you just heard, or the fragment of the song that you just heard, are actually the product of a collaboration with the technologist and poet Ross Goodwin, who, when we started working with him, was a free agent, but has now got snapped up by Google. So to create the model, we built a corpus of 22.6 megabytes of lyrics, which is about 4 million words. And that's like everything that we consider to be our influences, like the stew that makes a band, like our own back catalog, the music that was around us geographically growing up, the music our parents were listening to, our friends' bands, all the things that we would consider to be our influences and more, because 4 million words is a huge amount of material. So the result was this document is actually just one continuous block of output from the model that Ross created, which we printed out on a single sheet of dot matrix printer paper because we're divas and it's fun.
It looks great. Look at
And it looks great. But there's unbelievable richness to this material. I mean, like the output that the Magenta model creates, it's like these sequences of unexpected words, which sometimes have like structural cohesion, but which fall apart after 2 or 3 phrases. And that's like one of the most exciting and satisfying things about it, is to sort of watch how it meanders and tumbles through language. And to make lyrics, we essentially broke the lines of text that we thought were interesting over the backs of these generated MIDI melodies. which of course also have no relationship to the internal mechanics or cadences of human language, or the English language anyway, which led to all kinds of interesting semantic challenges, like pulling syllables apart kind of against the grain and singing them in ways that seemed weird. And I'm certain that when people listen to this whole song or any other music that's generated with this material that we create, they will constantly be mishearing things and hearing mondegreens, because it's just like not the way language normally breaks out. And speaking as someone who normally writes lyrics, with like some sense of meaning and some sense of kind of rhythm and cadence, performing generated lyrics in this way really opened me up to the like kind of obvious possibility that words are just sounds. Like that's how a lot of people who write pop music write. They just think about it in terms of melodic math. Whose thing is that?
Max Martin.
Yeah, like Max Martin has this thing about melodic math, which is just like, these syllables sound good with these notes, and that doesn't matter what it means, but that's not how I write songs, that's not how we write songs. So it really forced us to experience words as sounds and allowed us to accept the possibility of meaning coming after sound. And like beyond sound, the lyrics have this really interesting quality, like a lot of generated material does across all spectrums of visual as well, of being kind of at the edge of meaning. And there are phrases, again, that seem like they're going somewhere and then they collapse, and then there's these really strong images that like I never would have written. Like I can feel it in my head like a dog in bed, for example. Like a beautiful image and very vivid, but like not something that you would really leap to normally when you're writing a song. So, okay, disclaimer, it utterly terrifies us to play any new music, especially at this point in the process, but we, in the spirit of like sharing our process.
Especially to this audience, too.
Yeah. So please keep in mind, we're going to play you the full song. This is a rough and unmastered mix.
Can we bump it, too?
Yeah, can we bump it?
Here we
Can
go.
we like dim the mic?
Feel
Listen, you guys.
Thanks, y'all.
That is it's amazing because it sounds so much like you, and it's such a far cry from what people think of when they think about making music with algorithms. Like they
Right.
think you're gonna push a button and something really.
Yeah, save it for the panel.
Yeah. Right. We're on an important time right
Okay,
now.
we'll move on. Thank you, y'all.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
you
you guys so
guys.
much.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to be. This is horrible because I want to ask them so many. I'm sure all of you have like 5 million questions. Like, oh, just keep it in. Okay, so joining us here are members of the Google Magenta team, who are we have Adam and Jesse joining us, who are going to talk about the work that they've been doing, developing tools so that artists can kind of do these kinds of explorations. Yeah, I'll let you guys take it from here.
Okay, cool. Is this on? Can everyone hear
You
me?
hear him? Jesse, okay?
We're good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm Jesse, and this is Adam. It was just fantastic to get to watch the previous speakers present some of the stuff, because a lot of that is kind of a motivation behind what we do. We're on the Magenta team. Quick pictorial in case you forget who we are.
We're on the right side, too.
Yeah. But what is this really? We're in a very fortunate position where we're given a lot of leeway to choose what we research. And we decided that, so first and foremost, we're a machine learning research group. So we work on new types of algorithms, generative models that can make art and music and these types of things. But why are we here? We're normally at academic conferences. So why are we at Loop? And what sets us apart from different groups is that we're not just interested in machine learning for machine learning's sake. We're really interested in what happens when you stick a human in the loop and have the creative process, have tools try to create models that can be part of the creative process, and what works and what doesn't in terms of actually helping people be creative. And so as part of that, we create a lot of these machine learning tools, and everything we do is open source. All of our research is completely open. And the reason we do all this is we're really trying to cultivate a community of developers and creators working together to explore this territory together. And so that's why it's really important that everything we do is open source. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to get real concrete for a second, but then Jesse's going to get all philosophical in a minute too. But one of the main reasons we're super excited to be here is to announce Magenta Studio. This is something we've been working on for a few months now, and it's a set of Ableton plugins through Max that kind of show off the functionality of several of our models. And right now we have 4 different plugins. You can download them for free at that link. It's all going to be open source and everything. And we're going to be adding more over time, and we're hoping that also people from outside of Google and outside of Magenta will be contributing stuff to this as well. All right, so as you kind of heard a minute ago, it wasn't quite so easy to use our models a few years back. This is actually before what you were seeing previously, which is a big step up from this. But you used to have to install pip packages, install TensorFlow, make sure your GPU was set up. Type in, this is a command line that you would run to generate some MIDI files that would get dumped in a temp directory that you would have to go search for. So we knew this wasn't the right solution, but this is for computer scientists, this is great. This is what we usually use. So we quickly got to work on trying to develop some more usable interfaces, and one of the outcomes of that was Incense Super. We worked on this with Creative Lab, and it's actual physical hardware synthesizer that uses one of our models to allow you to kind of morph between the sounds of 4 different instruments that you can control with the corners there. And we put all of the instructions to build this yourself on GitHub, and a bunch of people took us up on it and actually built them and made music with it, which was great because that was our goal. And if you haven't heard this before, you should definitely check out that link. One of the problems with this type of model of doing things, though, is that we had by the time this was out, our research was we'd gone so much beyond this, and it was kind of old stuff for us. And to kind of do all this work that takes to launch something like this for every single one of the models we're developing, and how the speed at which you want to iterate was just not scalable. So more recently this year, we announced we launched Magenta.js, which is a JavaScript framework that brings the power of these models just to your web browser. And we open source that as well. A bunch of creative coders from around the world developed these different interfaces that let you kind of play around with different types of musical instruments that they dreamed up just tapping into the power of these models. And what's really cool about this is that once Max added very recently the support for Node.js, we could now bring Magenta.js into Ableton, and that's what powers Magenta Studio that we'll talk about a little bit more later after Jesse gets philosophical.
Right, yeah. So how many people have heard of artificial intelligence? Can I get a raise of hands? Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of hype and buzz and in this field, and it's going to radically transform everything and all that. And there is a lot of hyperbole and a lot of exaggeration, but it kind of does a disservice to the fact that there actually are some really interesting things that are happening in the field of machine learning. They're actually practical and useful and really, really interesting things to explore. And so when we make music with machine learning, it's basically algorithmic music, right? We're using algorithms to help aid our process, and that's nothing new, right? If you went to a parlor, if you were in your parlor in the 18th century, as one does, and you would play with musical dice, where you would be composing pieces just by rolling dice, right? And these dice would be composed by a programmer, but a composer, to actually write little melodic snippets, and then the user would actually create new pieces by just rolling the dice. And it's an old example, but I think it's a very good analogy for a lot of the procedural and machine learning generation systems we do today. And just on a very high-level overview, when we have procedural generation, it relies on a lot of expert knowledge. So the person has to come to the situation if you have a thought in mind about okay, there's going to be this key structure and there's going to be these rhythmic patterns. You have to really encode all that into a program that a user can then use the program to generate music. And what machine learning really does is it allows us to relax those rules of having to know all that expert knowledge, having to figure out what's the structure underneath, because we can use a lot of data in these series of algorithms to help uncover some of the structure that was otherwise hidden unless we could think of it. So then the programmer comes to this situation where you have the realm of programs that are possible, and then when given a set of music, you can help, the program you can train it to select a given program to generate music. So the analogy to the dice is if instead of having a composer write all the sides of the dice, if you got a bunch of compositions from a specific composer you were interested in, and then the algorithm decided what should be on the sides of the dice so that it can best emulate that style. So there's two elements of surprise. One is what actually happens when you roll the dice, but the other is more of a structural, semantic thing about what is the structure that these algorithms actually learn. And since it's relatively agnostic to the actual data that you're training, that's why everyone talks a lot of hype and buzz, because you can apply it to a lot of different fields, some of which are actually useful in a utilitarian sense, like object detection or detecting cancer and images and these types of things. But since we're artists, you can also do really fun things with it too. So for some of the things, I love this creepy image of the faces blending. You wouldn't know how to write rules about how to generate that. These are all fake faces. No, these people don't exist. This is data that was taken from a photo booth, and it was part of an art project, so people knew they were, having their pictures taken. And then the model learns the commonalities among people's faces, and then we move around in this learned space, and it does some realistic things and some unrealistic things. But the way it's unrealistic is still compelling and interesting. So that's a lot of those examples, but we just want to get it concrete and really not abstract. So what does this mean for music? We'll go through a couple case studies with the plugins that we're releasing now.
Right. So the first one we're going to talk about, we call Groovy. And this one is kind of like a humanized plugin that you might have used before, where you have a quantized drum beat and you want to make it feel like an actual drummer's playing it and add a bit of feel to it. So those typically work by either randomly sampling some velocities and some offsets, or by applying a pretty static groove template across the entire piece of music. What we do here is we use machine learning to actually learn that transformation. So we took a bunch of professional drummers and had them play on some MIDI drum kits and took that output, and then we quantized it to make it look like something that would come out of a sequencer. And then we trained a neural network to go back in the other direction, so to take those quantized beats and figure out how would a person actually play that, since we had both pieces of data. And then now we can, you can put in any quantized drum beat and then go use the model to go back the other direction. And what's nice is that since it's statistical, you can sample it a few times to kind of see different options, essentially. So let's see how this actually works in Ableton now. You open up the Groovy plugin, you get your quantized drum beat. So it's nice, but it's pretty stiff, right? We can hit the generate button here. And now here's the Groovy version. So that's the same underlying beat, but now you can see in the bottom there's velocities applied. We add a little funky bass, this kind of sets off a bit. But there's velocities applied, there's some offsets. And then we can switch back to the original just to hear how different it sounds. Yeah. Yeah. So this is, again, one of the plugins that are available.
Yeah. I like, it's like sometimes you don't know what's missing until it's there, and then anyways. So another common case is you have like a good start of an idea, but you want to think of different ways to continue it. What are ways I can develop a theme? So that's what this plugin does. And the way we train these models is in the exact same way that you would try to do it yourself. Is imagine you have this full sequence, but we only show the model part of it. And so this is some melody, and we say, well, what would be the next, probabilistically, what's the next thing that should occur? And so then it makes a prediction, and then we say, given all the things that you predicted, feed back into yourself, and what's the next thing that would occur, and what's the next thing that would occur. If you do this with a lot of training data and millions of melodies, what it can do is basically, in order to be able to make those predictions, it needs to learn about things like key and rhythmic patterns and that type of stuff. So here's just an example with an original melody. And we go over, we choose the melody mode and select a track and choose a clip. And we can choose the number of variations we want to make. We're going to add 3 bars to it, and we'll click generate, and then it's just drops them right in there. So you can see it retains a lot of the original idea, but it does variation. It stays in the same key of the original. And just this is just sort of an initial offering. We've done a lot of research since then that we hope to also incorporate. This is just an example now of trained on classical music. And as an added bonus, the audio itself is actually created with a neural synthesizer, like we were mentioning before. So that's a piano recording, but it's actually playing back with a neural network. In the interest of time, we'll keep going. But you can see that it was given an initial seed of this sort of classical melody, and it maintained a lot of the gesture, although the long-term structure didn't really develop, over the course of minutes or something like that. Another common situation is just getting started is the hardest thing. Where do I start? Sometimes you've got writer's block. So the generate function helps with this, where you can just ask it to just create you some melodies or some drums. So in this case, melody just means monophonic, so it actually made a bass line. But it's going to be in different keys because we haven't conditioned it to be in any particular key. So here's a rhythmic. Something maybe a little bit more classical. And then back to the bass line. And we can also maybe add some drum beats to it as well, so we generate some drum beats. So not going to be on the radio anytime soon, but it might be a lot more than where you were starting, and it might give you inspiration to take that and tweak it and make it into something your own.
All right, so the last one we're going to talk about is Interpolate, which uses the Music VA algorithm you heard about before. And the idea here is to interpolate or morph between different inputs. And just a kind of a quick overview of how we think about this. Instead of just taking, for example, two melodies and kind of mixing together the notes from those two melodies, that doesn't typically sound very good. So what we do is we map them into what we call an attribute space or a latent space that's kind of a learned representation of the different important qualities of those melodies. And then those are what we mix together. And then we map it back into the space of notes. So what I'm going to show you in just a second is starting with we'll take two melodies represented by these two dots, map them into that space, and then we'll kind of walk the line between them in the attribute space and hear what comes out at each step. And what you're going to notice is that it's a very smooth transition, and the points in between actually sound like real melodies. They don't just sound like junk of mixtures of things. So here's our first melody. And then here's the one we want to end up at.
I was early. We've heard this a lot.
All right, we made it. So that example is really nice because it does kind of sound like a piece of music on its own, and you can kind of experiment with this in our new Ableton plugin called Interpolate. The example I want to show here really quickly is actually doing with drum beats instead, and we're just going to take two drum beats and then just kind of get the midpoint that lives halfway between them. So let's hear the first two drum beats we're going to start with. And the second one. And we're going to generate here, and it's actually going to output kind of a reinterpretation of the first. So that's what this is. And then now it's going to come to kind of midpoints.
So is the model being trained based on what you put in the first?
So these good question. These are actually pre-trained models.
Okay.
But this type of model, we're using that pre-trained attribute space. So whenever you give it a piece of music, we're mapping that into the pre-learned attribute space and then doing that mixture, mapping it back.
So, I mean, on that point, so all the models are all open, and we have all this Python code and stuff you can use to train your own models. But a big open machine learning question that we're really interested in is how to make these more adaptable, right in front of you and on your computer, and learning more directly from your own.
Yeah, so just to be clear, to train these, we use a ton of specialized hardware and a lot of data that most people don't typically have. So we're trying to learn how to make models that are still pliable, right, by the end user.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay. I don't know how we're doing on time.
So I have a question. I think this actually goes till 1. It goes till 1. Okay. We just have a few minutes, and
Sure.
I mean, we could go for a long. I feel like this should be like a 4-hour long discussion. Why don't we bring our representatives from the other groups back on stage, and just do? I have 5 million questions, but as I'm sure the audience does as well. Okay, so we've had some really interesting presentations here in terms of from both the creative artist side and getting how you're sort of dealing with this new paradigm of making music, and then also from the technological side, where you're really have your hands in machine learning, right? And so for a lot of people out there, I'm wondering, who want to maybe start thinking about how to integrate this into their process. I'm curious what you think are sort of fundamental concepts from both the creative making side. What are things that you are fundamentally embracing in this new tool? And then maybe also from the machine learning side, what do people fundamentally need to kind of understand? if I'm introducing someone to electronic music who's been playing symphony, analog instruments, I might introduce the idea of modularity or signal flow, these kinds of things. So, or the idea that you can create non-linearly, these kinds of things. So I'm curious to hear from you all what you think our audience needs to, like, how they can approach this topic.
Oh my God.
It's a huge question.
Such a huge question.
Well, I mean, you don't have to have the whole answer, but it's like you're in it already. You're
Can I
doing it.
try?
You're breaking it down. Yeah.
So I love the diagram that shows the crumpled piece of paper with the two balls and then this flat piece of paper with two balls. I think that this...
That was exactly what it was, by the way.
It's a wrinkle in
Well,
time.
I mean, I think that being able to think about latent space is something that's extremely interesting from an artistic side, because you're like, okay, everything that we thought about as a feature, something that appealed to us or that we recognized in what we were listening to, is now, there is a space that captures all those things in a way that, something like MIDI, which was great for many, many years as a way of, representing something as complex as the experience of listening to music, just there was a lot that's missing from that. So I think this idea of, understanding that we've been living in a world of very lossy compression, and all of a sudden we're having a lot more interaction with how things are being compressed. And, just compression being a relation between our experience and the way that we describe things or the way that we use them. So it is this modularity, but it's like a semantic modularity.
So would you say a fundamental concept is be prepared to question an assumption that you had about what you couldn't control before? Or...
Well, maybe I can help build on this as well, which is sort of, it's interesting because a lot of these systems we're describing, you could do before, right? If you spent a lot of time studying music and studying computers, you could come up with some rules that would do similar things. You can have attributes that you can move around in attribute space and stuff. What's interesting from this is these algorithms are, you can set it up to learn it from the data. So in some ways, it might extract things from the data, attributes that are there that you would normally expect. But it also can be a reflection, it can be a helpful thing in terms of reflection. Like if you're using it for your own music, sort of like learning, oh, I didn't realize that we had this whole thread to our music that wasn't there before.
Yeah, that's something that I kind of actually expected to see more of, honestly, going into it.
Okay.
It's just like
more of a reflection of your process?
For the process to be more of a mirror. I think it actually has this kind of sort of democratizing quality because the data sets are so large. It's like you're not just working with you and your collaborators, you're working with like the entire history of music like in your back pocket, basically. And so it allows you to sort of stretch intergenerationally and like hopefully cross-culturally as well, although I know data sets are still pretty limited in that department. But I think, it's fascinating to see the patterns that emerge, like that aren't just patterns in your own work, but in the larger thing. Like for example, in the corpus of text that we have, or that's sort of the model for lyrics that we have, when the temperature is really low, you see a lot of repetition, obviously, and those repetitions tend to be the kinds of things that come up a lot in pop music, like love, sex, death, hate. It's like an entire page of like 300 instances of the phrase "I want you," or "I want your brain," which is like the scariest one, or "I need you," I want. It's like these things, these like deep undercurrents of like human emotion and familiarity that come up when the temperature is low, and then when the temperature is high, you see this kind of like more oddness and these like generated proper names and stuff. So yeah, I feel like it's a mirror to humanity, not so much a mirror to the individual artist.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you think that leads right into my next question, which is sort of what are ways that, from your experiences and I guess from your work with artists, does machine learning offer us to sort of advance our creative processes? Like what's coming out of it that you're learning or changing that was a benefit?
I'll take it. I think it allows you to see how much choice there is in every moment that you make work. I mean, there's so many rules in our like weird little MacGyvered system that we have. Like, there's so many rules that we've set into place in order to make things like a sort of consistent output within the ethos of what we're trying to do here. But like, even when it feels restrictive, there's just like this infinite amount of choice still in the smallest things, in production and performance and arrangement and pattern and structure, especially structure, because that seems to be the part where the models kind of fall apart. But just the intense amount of choice there is in everything, and how you could very easily get bogged down in individual choice from one moment to the next. But when you sort of remove a lot of these external things, you end up being like really freed into the details, if that makes sense.
Did you feel like when you were doing the vocal work that you were being challenged or discovering yourself as an artist in a different way?
Yeah, beyond.
Like in what ways?
I mean, I'm not a virtuosic singer. I often joke, like, I'll sing the same thing like 5 times, and I'll be like, 5 great takes, and they're all different. But it does force you to laser in on the sound, and like, especially when the words begin to lose meaning, and in order to break a word into the lyric, you have to do something really weird with it that is like unfamiliar. I think we can all say that it challenged us in unexpected ways. Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on something you were saying earlier about like the reflection of the whole, and I think that is a really important thing with where these tools are now. Is it's important to really not feel afraid to personalize it. That like, since it is sort of taking like the mean of it's trained on these large corpuses, it's there like for inspiration and it's there for things, but it's really to really make it adaptable, you kind of have to do that part yourself at the moment. And I think that is an interesting way that these algorithms are going to change in the future, but they're not there at the moment. So
I like that limitation. I think it's cool. I mean, the fact that like the models can't quite like spit out a fully formed pop song. I mean, beyond the sort of economic ramifications of what that means for artists, like it's nice to know that like there is an actual conversation that's happening where the tool is really good at this one specific thing, and I'm still good at the things that I'm good at, and I can identify interesting patterns and arrange them and like make structure out of it, because that's like what art making is a lot of the time.
It seems like, and we've talked about this a little bit, I mean, your presentation was about investigating perception and using the tool to sort of reflect on what it means to categorize listening.
Yeah, there's a kind of choosiness, I think, what you're talking about, like, to be like, oh, this is good, this is bad, and that sort of has been opened up a little bit now, and there are other processes that are going on that you may be not aware of, like biases you have, things that you taste, or like taste might come into play. And then it is funny, this question of like, oh, can I train it on different data? Because you're like, you always want to push outside of what's there, but I think it's interesting that these models are very robust. Like you can't break them. Like you can't make broken. Or you can't, I mean, I don't think it's broken. I think it sounds good all the time.
I mean, I think it's actually hard to make them fixed at all. They're in a permanent state of broken.
The brokenness is what's interesting. I mean, this is like a concept I'm trying to push forward, is this idea of like the computer accent, which is that, generated material, both like text, visual, notation data, like they all have this kind of weirdness to them that's, I think, aesthetically really interesting and also very finite, like in the sense that the models will all get much more sophisticated very quickly, much quicker than we probably even can anticipate. And that will be gone, that weirdness will be gone, and we will totally be nostalgic for it in the way that people are nostalgic for vinyl and tape and analog now.
It is also this thing about it being able to do more than one thing at once, which is something that, like, to make a fully formed pop song, you'd have to be able to do all these different tasks simultaneously. And that's something that humans are really good at doing, even though they have to make these hard decisions.
Totally.
But,
Just the rough edges thing. It's kind of an interesting thing that normally when people design these algorithms, they're trying to optimize something. But here we don't actually have any metric for what we're trying to optimize, because we want to optimize how useful it is to somebody, and that's different for you and you and you. Like it's a personal thing, and so it's a constantly shifting target. So it's this interesting. It asks us from a academic standpoint, like, what types of models can be more adaptable? Like, you actually investigate different math in terms of like what can actually solve that. And when it makes mistakes, it's learning from the data. So the types of mistakes it makes are sort of more grounded in whatever it is. So like NSynth has a very unique sound quality to it. Meaning it's very compressed, and the pitch shifts up and down a lot, and it has extra harmonics because it's not drawing the waveform quite right, and all these things. But what's nice is those are very different than the types of artifacts that you would get with other synthesis algorithms, because they're sort of based in the data itself. So a lot of people really like that stuff, and we made a better algorithm, and they're just like, no, I want that 2016 NSynth sound.
Yeah.
Totally, yeah. I wasn't going to tell you, but we hated the way the NSynth sounded at first.
Yeah, right.
It's like, this sounds like the sound quality is bad, but then you recognize it as its own aesthetic, and then it becomes like incredible. We had that.
It's like the TB-303,
Totally.
which was originally created
Yeah.
to replace like symphonic sounds, and the people thought it was garbage.
Yeah,
But
you just have to change your perception, reorient your perception,
Yeah.
listen differently.
So I think we're just about at the end.
What?
Unfortunately, I know it's terrible. It's a travesty. But for people who want to get started with this, like, what are a couple go-to resources for people that they may not know from all of your different perspectives?
oh,
Oh,
Well,
I'm sorry.
mean-
plug.
Why don't you take that one? Why don't you start there?
G.co/magenta/studio. We've worked hard to try to make it accessible, and we would really love feedback. And we have discussion groups and everything. So we would love people to say, "Hey, I wanted to do this. This worked for me."
It sounds like you guys are really looking to understand how artists are using these tools, and that is informing your process of development and design. So this is an important time for people who want to be involved in what the future of this technology is going to look like, to get involved and to give you guys feedback.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Great. What do you guys think?
Same. I mean, there's a lot of consumer-facing AI music making startups and apps and tools and stuff, and they're honestly mostly for people who want royalty-free music for their YouTube makeup vlogs. Is my vibe. They're not
That's valid.
There's not a lot of expressive control in a lot of those tools. So I would really say Magenta is the place to be.
Honestly, there's also this sense of kind of a more hacky approach of, if you start thinking about things like image and sound and, sound tools that are designed to do one thing, if you can repurpose them, then you can kind of get into a more wild terrain of things people are working on. Like maybe you found something that is for image recognition, but you think about, well, how can you make it an image, and how can you listen to that image? And I think this is a really fertile way to be thinking about materiality of things and what you can do with synthesis, is just to sort of, start thinking about other things as being sonic in some way. If that sounds vague.
I love that.
Yeah.
Like a thought experiment. Start with a thought experiment.
Well, I think a lot of these tools are okay, we're going to use image recognition techniques on sound, and if you can kind of do that yourself a little bit if you're a little hacky about it, especially if you're using a tool like Max MSP or something.
Totally.
There's ways to break it open a little bit.
There's a lot of resources out there. Also, if you just want an intro to machine learning and stuff, there's this blog, Distill, that does a very good job of visualization and all that type of stuff. So
learning about learning is very compelling, I think, too.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. This has been, I hope that all of you have enjoyed the presentations from our panelists. For me, it's been wonderful to get to hear all these different perspectives. I have a couple announcements. One is at the end of this. Actually, let's just do a round of applause for everyone.